Throughout the Gospels, we hear various classifications attached to Jesus. For example, in today's first reading, the apostle refers to Jesus as the Nazarene, naturally in deference to Jesus coming from Nazareth. In other places, we hear Jesus referred to as Rabbi, obviously in deference to him having been raised in the Jewish faith and is now a teacher of the Jewish faith, or one classified as a teacher. In another place, a blind man refers to Jesus as the Son of David, clearly a reference to Jesus being born in the family of David. And in another place, people refer to Jesus as the Carpenter, or the carpenter's son, in deference to his connection to a man we celebrate all year as a church, the patron saint of the universal church throughout the world, Saint Joseph, who was on earth the father of Jesus, and in fact is the linchpin, the keystone to many of these classifications. He's a Nazarene because that is where Joseph with Mary raised him. He's a rabbi because that is the faith in which Joseph took a strong hand in raising him. He's a carpenter because that is the profession that Joseph trained him in. And he's a son of David because he was born as a son of Joseph. That connection to Joseph links Jesus to the family of David. But in the gospel today, Jesus puts a classification on himself that in many ways stands out, not just because of what it means to us as people of faith, but because of the fact that when we look at Jesus in his life here on earth, it really doesn't fit into any category. And that is Jesus referring to himself as the Good Shepherd. After all, was Jesus a shepherd? Did he tend sheep? We know what shepherds are. And the answer is no. By profession, he was a carpenter. In matters of faith, he was a rabbi. But he refers to himself as a good shepherd, which naturally is a metaphorical term. However, as in many cases in terms of imagery such as this with regard to faith, we see it not as a literal term, although there were literally shepherds in Israel, there were literally sheep, and Jesus literally was not one of them. We understand it in a mythological sense. Now, when you hear me say mythology, you might think, well, isn't mythology something that's false? And I don't mean that. Mythology is not to be understood in terms of folklore or tall tales and legends. Because after all, mythology, in more ways than we can imagine, are connected to reality to a certain degree. For example, we are familiar with the story of the Trojan War. Archaeologically, they are finding more and more that perhaps a great war took place against a single city-state in a region that the story of the Trojan War, the Iliad, describes was the location of Troy. It obviously resulted in the devastation of this town. But the story that has been told through the tradition of Homer elevates that story to something larger than life that involves the participation of the gods and goddesses and demigods, the children of the gods, participating in this war. It has become mythologized, even as we are discovering that perhaps there was a historical event on which this mythology is based. There were obviously strong men in both Israelite and Greek society that in storytelling of them have been mythologized to stories of Heracles, or Hercules as he's known in Roman mythology, and Samson, the great strong man of the story in the book of Judges. And so there's something to be understood in the mythological image that gives us a deeper insight to the world around us, not just standing off on itself as something that's false or untrue, but a story that when we know it, when we learn it, when we internalize it, gives us a deeper insight into the reality of the world around us. And so Jesus now applies an image to himself, and in many ways Jesus has been mythologized as the Good Shepherd, even if he was not so in history. There was a Jesus who lived in a society in which there were shepherds, but now we will see illustrations and images of Jesus holding the staff, carrying the lamb, looking over the flocks. This is not a historical image, but very much one in which we look into that metaphor of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. And the metaphor is not so much in shepherd, because Jesus was not a shepherd, but rather the metaphor is in the word the. Was Jesus a shepherd? No. Is Jesus a shepherd? Yes. Does he look over his flock? Yes. But Jesus is not a shepherd. Jesus is the shepherd. He is the good shepherd who watches over us, who knows us, and we strive to know him. In that we take this carpenter, rabbi, son of David from Nazareth, and come to a deeper understanding of who he is in his role as our Messiah. We can't say him being a shepherd is false, because he is a shepherd. He is our shepherd. But he's not just a shepherd. He is the shepherd and the good shepherd. But he is not all of that in a vacuum. Because we remember, especially this year, everything Jesus is and everything we have come to understand him to be is in many ways in deference to who he is as a son of Joseph, who raised him in that faith that in which he became a rabbi, who raised him as a son of David, who raised him as a carpenter, who became the good shepherd. And all this year we remember everything that deepens our faith about Jesus, and we give true gratitude for the role of Joseph in raising Jesus to become the man who became our good shepherd. In many ways, it's the same way in which one would refer to me as a priest. I am a priest. But without the priest, I would not be a priest. Without the high priest, I would not be a priest among you, serving you. Even on earth, Jesus was not a priest. He was not in the temple. He did not work offering sacrifices. He did not serve as high priest. But we see him from heaven as our high priest. And without that connection to the high priest, who is not the pastor of this parish, the high priest who is not the archbishop of this diocese, but rather the high priest, which is Christ, who was not a priest in his ministry on earth, but we recognize his role as high priest in virtue of his sacrifice on the cross, and I serve as a priest in deference to my connection to the priest, which is Jesus. And it's appropriate to remember that as well, because every year on this fourth Sunday of Easter, we hear Jesus speaking of himself in that role and image of the Good Shepherd. And throughout the church, we remember this Sunday as Good Shepherd Sunday, but also a Sunday in which we promote awareness for vocations. Vocations to the priesthood and the religious life, which our church sees a great shortage of throughout the world, but especially in our immediate vicinity here, the church in San Francisco and the Catholic Church in the United States. We are called to pray for young men and women to consider and perhaps answer a call given to them by our high priest, our good shepherd, Jesus, the carpenter, Nazarene, son of David, who was the rabbi, to serve the people of God in the church as priests and religious brothers and sisters. But even that is not done in a vacuum. Vocations are fostered, yes, by the church. We encourage them among our people. But first and foremost, they are fostered within the families. Mothers and fathers fostering that devotion, that faith, and that openness to hearing and answering a possible call that is given to them by our Good Shepherd to serve as priests and religious brothers and sisters. We certainly pray for vocations, but when we are all praying that everyone else's child becomes a priest or brother or sister, are we really surprised then that we see the shortage that we see today? What is the disposition each of us have in the idea of the possibility of, I won't say our children, because I have none, of your children entering into the religious life and or answering a call to the priesthood? Picture it in your mind, your child coming home and saying, I've decided to enter this community of sisters to continue their work. I'm considering entering the seminary to study to be a priest. What would be your reaction to that? Would it be one that's negative? Would it be encouraging? Would it be just simply passive? Picture yourself already with a child in formation to the religious life or the priesthood, and they come home and they might say, well, after discerning and thinking and partially being trained, I've decided that I will leave that formation and not go on to be a priest or religious brother or sister. What would your feelings be? Would they be feelings of relief? Would they be feelings of resentment? Would they be simply passive, whatever they want to do? What is the disposition we have in fostering that openness to vocations in our families? Not something that can be forced, but hopefully something that is not hindered. And I could tell you stories of that, unfortunately, of people who thought and believed they had a vocation but found opposition within their family and especially from their parents. Even when I was first considering the priesthood and I first met with a pastor at my parish to discuss it with him, eventually he asked me, with a slight degree of ominous tone, what do your parents think about this? And of course my parents were supportive, but we know there are many cases in which that's not the case. And so on this Good Shepherd Sunday, we ask, pray for vocations, encourage vocations. But just as Jesus was not a carpenter, son of David, rabbi, Nazarene, and ultimately our Good Shepherd in a vacuum, let us remember the role of the holy parents, especially on this year, the role of Joseph, the father, in raising Jesus and fostering the man who became the carpenter, who is our Good Shepherd. Remember your role as parents. And in deference to the saint we honor this year, to all fathers, remember your role as the father of children, as we strive to answer whatever call the Good Shepherd has for us. But on this particular Sunday, we give particular deference to the efforts of our church, of our parishes, and we pray of our families to foster solid, substantial, faith-filled, and faithful vocations to the priesthood and the religious life, who take on that vocation in service to the people of God and the church, in deference to the carpenter from Nazareth, the son of David, the son of Joseph, the rabbi, who is our Good Shepherd.